just a last one from me, just 1 second. We're just going into the getting your feedback, but think about the following.
We do this.
Look at, we would like to find out what's the position that you use. What is the competency? Give us a competency definition, how you defined it, and why is it important? I.e., is this competency because this product or this role, critical products or services is the following. That's why this is an important competency. And then, i.e., if you use it for recruitment, a typical question, and how you're going to assess that question, the response. Is it, just, I like this blue eyes of the person, or, is it, this is an experienced person, just a, quick one. Just a guideline on the feedback. Okay, I'm handing over to Mr. Jeff.
All right, so, going table to table, I have 2 options. I can take a volunteer or I can select. Who wants to go first? Do we have anybody who's ready, willing, and able to jump up and start talking? Over here? All right, so who's your spokesperson? I guess you are. There you go.
Okay, so the position name was the career planner. A short description of the role would be conducting assessment with clients and connecting them with viable career opportunities. What's that? Competency, or shall we go with the product and service?
Whatever, those products and support.
Okay, so the product and service would be skills assessment, resume writing, interview prep, behavioral coaching. And the receiver in all of these cases has been the client himself or herself. The task, what is the first activity in the process? That will be like the intake meeting with the client. And so the knowledge, skills, should I go through all the details?
Or just read us the competency statement that you want to test for the workforce survey.
Okay, so we'll be using coaching knowledge and navigation skills. To do what? To develop an action plan. To what effect is to identify areas of development and opportunity. And what's the standard is to the standard of highly engaged and motivated clients.
Okay. And so then how would you recruit for that position?
So when we recruit, there will be like technical questions. For example, give me an example of a time where you had interviewed others. So that's just to, for example, to assess their skills in career assessment. Another behavioral questions will be also behavioral interview questions, like give me an example where you had worked with a team or you had a conflict with a coworker and how did you handle it. So they will be giving more from an actual example rather than just like us measuring how good they are. And then based on that, we will identify if they are just knowing about that competency, just as a knowledge or awareness, or they are highly competent by giving us more details in their answer to know how knowledgeable they are about it.
Okay. Okay. One of the things when you're doing that is to look at in your questioning. It's not only give us an example of how you did that, but it's to throw them a curve. Well, what if this happened? What would you do then? Because now you're looking at depth and breadth of knowledge and the ability to apply it in different contexts, in different ways. And that's the difference between, when we talked about that granularity piece. If you can apply your knowledge in one type of situation one way, that's one level of competence. If you can apply that different ways, and I would do it this way in that situation, because now you can test that person has a much broader knowledge base and a much better ability to apply that knowledge in different circumstances. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that would be the difference between maybe a top-rated candidate versus someone who's in the middle of the pack. Okay, thank you. Who's next? Liz?
So we did a position based on a stage production manager role. And the competency statement that we're working with is using volunteer and stage management skills, integrate people and equipment resources to provide a platform for shows and artistic needs for smooth and streamlined production. And the recruitment question that we targeted based on that competency was the volunteer engagement section of that, and how they have worked in the past as a volunteer, what's the word we used? Volunteer coordinator, and how they would create volunteer engagement, keep volunteer engagement, and how would they integrate themselves into a position where they are taking on the role of two previous volunteers, where they would have to learn from the people beneath them to take on that role.
Okay. What does everybody think? No one thinks? No one thinks. Okay. So that's good. And again, it's the idea of how that individual integrates different types of knowledge and different skill levels in a specific context for a specific outcome. And you may find, particularly if you're dealing in a volunteer organization where someone has significant experience, but in a completely different context. As an example, if I was applying for that position, I used to do movement logistics management for a mobile radar squadron when I was in the Air Force, which isn't anything like on stage, except it is. Right? Because we have timelines, we have deadlines, we have a bunch of people, some of them know what they're doing, most of them don't. And we've got to accomplish it within a very specific things in a very specific timeline. So maybe I would be a candidate for that position as a volunteer. But then there's still a knowledge gap, because I have no idea how to do stage one.
Well, you can still use your transferable skills, it's just from a different industry, right?
Okay. So these are ways, particularly where we're trying to fit people who may not have specific, right? I mean, if you find someone who did it, they did it for the Calgary Philharmonic and now they're doing it for this organization, great. But maybe you can find someone who's got those skills and you can map those out, in terms of critical skills and critical competencies for the position. Does that make sense? Okay, who's next?
So the role we created was a service coordinator. So they work with individuals to connect them to resources. The key competency that we focused on was advocating for clients, so helping them to connect to resources and in general improve their wellness using social work values and skills. So some of the key pieces that we focused on was understanding what advocacy is, having a general knowledge of the resources and social work practices, and creating connections. So some of the questions that we came up with was, can you tell us about a time when you advocated for someone? How did that work for you, and what might you have done differently? In a particular situation, and give an example of a situation that might come up for a client, how might you help them to create wellness? Or how might you help create wellness for this person? Can you tell us about a time when you created connections with someone? And tell us about what wellness means to you, and what your experience with clients and wellness has been.
Thank you. And the other piece of that, again, is then identifying with specific statements or behaviors what would constitute top performance. What are you looking for in a top performer versus an average performer? Because you want to create an interview guide that allows someone who didn't write the competency statement to recognize the kind of person that you're looking for. Okay. Thank you. We saved the best for last, right?
Yeah.
All
All right, the position that we did was a social worker position, and it was to provide frontline support for clients. And our competencies, the product or service that we focused on was our initial assessment of client or client intake process. And our competency statement goes something like this. They wrote it down, I didn't write it down, but I can piece it together. Using knowledge of our services, SPDATs, and skills in listening and crisis management, identifies suitability of client for programs to best match client needs to our services so that client needs are met effectively. So that was our competency statement. And then as far as the competency question, the areas that we would question, we had crisis management training and experience, knowledge of broad industry services, listening skills, and writing skills. And then I'll just give you a couple of examples. On the crisis management training experience, we would ask what experience or training does the candidate have in this area, and rate them on a 5-point scale. And then knowledge of the industry services, we would give a situation and ask, so we might say you have a client who's suffering from maybe an addiction, and ask them what services would you refer that client to assess the product knowledge.
Okay, any comments, questions? All right. So how difficult is it?
Once you get the statement, it's easy.
Yeah, but getting to the statement, boiling it down to that competency statement is absolutely critical. And you've done it for one piece of a job. And it took you all morning. Yes.
And is there outline or information that would dictate how many competencies you should put in, say, a job description? And then I guess you pull out more, you draw out more during an interview, but is that, it's a one-page job description, is there any guidelines around that? Like how many qualifications or competencies do we want to state to make sure that we're pretty sharp?
The critical ones for virtually any job comes down to something like 3 to 5 that are absolutely critical. Right? They're the ones that separate the superstars from the people who can just do it. The rest are important, but if you can pick for those 3 or 4 or 5 high-level competencies, those are the ones that we want to test around. So,
Can we divide like the whole list of competencies between core and support? So the 3 to 5 that you're talking about will be like the core competencies that the job requires, and then there will be a set of support competencies that is relevant but not as important as the core.
yeah, when you go down into and this, when you're identifying the role, okay. So you call them core competencies. I would call them critical competencies. Right? Core for me is things that apply to anybody who works in the organization, and they apply them at some level. But they're for a particular job, particular role within the organization. You're looking at very specific, critical pieces that make that successful. Right? And again, it's usually 3 to 5. And you can build your developmental plan around that. You can build your coaching plans around that, mentoring programs around that, to build people up in those critical pieces of that role. Which is not to say, like I said, the underlying, the other pieces of it, the support pieces of it are important as well. When you build these frameworks, I like to talk about agile competency frameworks. And depending on what level of the organization and what the purpose is, depends on how much detail we go into on this stuff. So those 3 to 5 critical competencies may translate into a dozen or more specific task competencies, which may break down into hundreds of knowledge and skill bits. And it all depends on where you're dealing in the organization and how far you need to go. Yes.
I'm wondering how you apply the competency framework to what you just said. So if there's 3 to 5 competencies and you're trying to reflect all the elements that I understand should be part of your competency set using this framework? I just want to hear a little
Okay.
bit more about that.
So the frame, this piece here,
Yeah.
okay. So we've got technical stuff, and again, it becomes role specific. You may find everybody has bits and pieces of their job that are in all of this, right? Okay. Depending on the job, the emphasis, the most important things might be on the technical side. Okay, and we can focus on that area. It may be the specific work processes. It may be one or two, or one from each, okay, that are critical to getting the work done properly. And so this is a framework, or a mental model that allows you to identify where these pieces fit in the overall scheme of what makes somebody useful in their job. It doesn't mean that every job has to have, all of these things are critical to every job. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's simply a mental model, and it's a way for you to look at something and go, okay, that's very technical. That changes the way I assess it as well, right? Technical skill I can assess through a technical test or through credentialing, through academic or whatever. Work process and business competencies, if that's critical to the job, now I need someone who's been there, done that, and done it in the context that I'm, so transferable skills not so much. I want to find somebody, who's managed an oil refinery. Pulp mill, similar, but I want an oil refinery person because there's specific work processes, business competencies, regulatory pieces, whatever. So you see how we now form our understanding of the job by looking at these things. Okay. Does that make sense? Make more sense at least?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I maybe just share what I noticed some organizations are doing and what we're also doing? So I think a very relevant question on how many competencies per role. So let me differentiate between two things. There's a competency, what we call the competency library for a position. If you look at this one, that's sort of, you get to 15 in the library, 3 per quadrant. Why I get to the 5 to 15 or 8 to 15 competencies is, remember in some of the leadership practices or management practices some time ago, the key performance areas was quite important for any job. So there's 5 to 15 or 5 to 8 key performance areas. So partly of that thinking influenced how we use it. But what I often do is, I see that people develop 15 in the library. When I decide on a profile, that's the competencies that I allocate to the person and say, for your part of this role, I would like to focus on the following 3. Because I think that's important. Don't try and focus on all 15 at once when you do development. Select the 3 most important ones in one of those quadrants out of the library. Because 15 is just too much to work on. But not necessarily say that the library may not include 15, like 3 in each one, 3 core ones, 3 technical ones, 3 legislatory ones, but not a lot more. I've seen that roles with the library with like 50 competencies in it. It really is just becoming too granular.
Thanks very much. I've got a question actually of everyone. So Dirk, Jeff, and all of you. As you're looking at this, where does talent mobility come in? And the reason I'm asking this, I'm just going to give the background. So we know that we've got thousands of unemployed talent in Calgary. What in this model could have helped, could help in the future, and as we see shifts that are going to be happening in the way we do work, how does this model, how can it help avoid a next cycle of another 7,000 engineers out of work? Because that's the next big question when you hire and you're doing all the work you've just spent almost 3 hours doing, is then what? Because what we've been doing for years, way before I came to Calgary, I can't find Hannah. Do you know anybody? How can I steal from Jackie? How can I get somebody that's worked with Sarah? Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't have a job for you anymore. Nice meeting you. Dirk, I don't have anybody. And I've got a project I just signed up. Saba's now gone to Toronto, and he won't return my calls because I now laid him off twice in a row. Gee. So how can this conversation help us in that conversation?
Doesn't?
Well,
It might. Might, if you stretch it, I
and
guess.
well,
Have I stumped everybody?
No, you haven't stopped. I just don't know what's the purpose of your question.
The purpose of my question is
Yeah.
labor mobility.
labor mobility is in.
For the
Who's
employed.
responsible for that though?
The employer.
Or the engineers? I mean, you said
The
7,000 engineers. Okay,
the
what is-
employer is responsible for that. When you're hiring somebody, if you only hire me
Yeah.
for that one task,
Yeah,
you're gonna lay me off.
yeah.
So where does the labor mobility conversation come in?
I-
So that you
I don't
don't
know-
have-
I don't know how important that discussion is though. I guess
Well,
It's-
I'm not catching what.
At a strategic level, it's really important, right? I mean, we have, in Canada right now, we have something like 500,000 skilled immigrants who are underemployed. There needs to be a paradigm shift, and this is at the strategic level, in terms of HR management and organizational management, to think about organizations not in terms of boxes on an org chart, but in terms of competency and outcomes. And if you look at organizations in terms of outcomes and the associated competencies, all of a sudden, people are not their job description or their occupational title anymore. I came to this through a really roundabout route. And so I'll try and answer the question by telling a story, if that works. Okay. When I started out as a consultant, many years ago, a long time ago, when I had more hair and it wasn't all gray, I was given a job to look at the competency level in the maintenance skilled trades for a large manufacturing organization with 7 plants across the country. The specific occupational descriptions that come from National Occupational Analysis documents, the Red Seal program, whatever. And then we looked at what was important within the plans. And what we found was, much to our surprise, some of the most critical things that these people did inside those organizations were not actually part of the trade that they held, but might have been part of somebody else's trade ticket. And we've done a number of these. That was 7 plants across the country. We did another study with 32 sawmills in BC and found out that up to 50% of what people did wasn't actually part of their occupational title. That changes everything, because you can't recruit now based on a job title, based on an occupational ticket, or based on a academic credential, right? Because so much of what's important in those roles had nothing to do with what they were actually trained to do. They acquired that skill, that knowledge, somehow, over any number of years. When you start looking at jobs in terms of overall competence, and not only the specifics, for a particular piece of the pie, but other things that are involved. And then you start analyzing individuals when they come to work for you and find out all of the other skills that people bring to the table, much of which isn't part of their job description, but which they apply on the job. Two things happen. You find out that you can actually accomplish a lot more in your organization without hiring new people, just taking advantage of the latent skill that's wandering around in the building that you don't even know about. And by identifying that on a competency basis, now people can transfer those skills either into other parts of the organization or into other organizations, not based on, they're a PM or whatever. And that's, I guess, a development on, has everybody here heard of the 70-20-10 learning model? People are familiar with that? Okay. It says that 10% of what you're useful at is what you learn in school, 20% is what you learn through mentoring and on-the-job coaching, and the other 70% is what you learn by screwing it up and getting it right later. Okay? So 90% of what makes you useful isn't things you learned in school. Right? How do you quantify it? How do you identify it? Employers need to look at that as well and need to identify and quantify that. Nationally, we don't have a framework for doing that. So now we're on my soapbox. This is what I've been advocating for years. But the whole HR profession needs to start thinking about that and growing the idea of organizations as a collection of competency that's designed to achieve specific goals and needs. And once we've made that paradigm shift in that direction, labor mobility becomes simple. Because we can draw a line between whatever you've done to whatever it is you'll need to do and trace learning paths between them. We can't do that. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Totally does, and that's exactly where I wanted to go. And this is going to become so critical in the next 5 to 10 years. It is going to make the difference between Canada being a real player or literally nobody will hear about us. Historically, we are never on top of our game on productivity. We know that. In innovation, we are faltering. And at the beginning, I started by bringing the conversation about what automation is going to be doing to our jobs, not to your grandchildren, not your children, to you. That's how short the time frame is. So if there is anything that's certainly out of this, if we can go back to the other slide, Dirk, please, the first one, the framework. And, oh yeah, that one. For me, and now I'm HR through and through, and I was able to do HR in a number of countries. The only reason I was able to eat was because instinctively, because nobody taught me, I didn't know Jeff, I didn't know Dirk then, but instinctively, I lived in here, and I lived in here. And somehow the instinct of survival kicked in and said, if I can demonstrate that I'm able to take what I have acquired through education and training up there, and now I can show you and you that it doesn't matter where in the organization you stick me, I can bring that to play and I can deliver on a job that has nothing to do with my experience or education, I'm gonna put food on my table. And I've done that my entire career, not knowing what I was doing. Until I met these guys and understood that framework. And so in between here and here, that's what you want for your organizations. And if we as a country, through the work that Jeff and Dirk are doing, we can move toward that, we will get to where Europe is. I mean, the only reason that we are at the bottom of our productivity and innovation is because we silo ourselves through the job title and the job description. What are you? You know, we meet, we go have a coffee. Oh, hi, what do you do? I'm an engineer. What the heck does that mean? What does I'm an engineer mean? I haven't got a clue. But if you say to me, I'm a problem solver, I create frameworks, I analyze situations, now I've got a picture. And I don't do engineering. It's just that we don't talk about this in those terms.
May I just-
Sorry, I'm really passionate about this because you have no idea what's coming down at the end of the tunnel that we are into. And I'm so passionate about this that we can get in front of the freight train.
Because there are organizations that don't have job descriptions.
I know.
I know, it's terrible.
I know. I mean, you know, but we thought, I learned to do job descriptions the old way, right? And I'm looking at what's going to happen, for instance, now, and I'm gonna take the fulfillment industry, the transportation industry. We've got fleets in Germany of self-driving trucks. Who wants to write a job description for a self-driving truck? Do you know how many jobs are gonna go bye-bye? They're being tested in the US. How long before it hits the 401? So if we don't.
401 might be safer.
Yeah, I know.
It might be. Yeah, you're right about that.
Just a quick practical experience of how we can influence it. As HR person, we confronted when I was responsible for a unit to make sure we've got talent, staff planning. We worked on taking parts, and we wanted chemical engineers with experience on taking parts. And we couldn't find chemical engineers that's long enough there. So the question when we started thinking about competency, and we said, okay, there's 3 phases. You design a tailings pond, you design and build it, then you operate it, and then you close it out. So life cycle, and we identified the competencies. When we started doing this, we moved away from how many chemical engineers or mechanical engineers or engineers in general do you need, to say, let's first understand the competencies. And then when we discussed that, we realized that our biggest challenge is in that specific organization that we run the tailings ponds. We don't really build it, we can buy it in. When we close it out, we buy the skills in. Running the tailings ponds is pretty important. Now, the law changed in terms of the flocculant and how we manage tailings ponds. We then moved out and did analysis and found out that chemical processing of water is one of the core skills. And the question was, is it a chemical engineer that's better than that, or who's really understanding the chemistry? And we figured out, aha, it's chemists. The chemist who's at university who's teaching the chemical engineers. Maybe we need to look at that alternative resource. And we actually went to universities and we recruited chemists to be responsible for part of the running and analysis of the tailings ponds. And they did a better job than engineering. Not because they're better or worse. It was interesting. The chemical engineers wanted to move on to design of facilities and maintenance of facilities and process development. The chemists wanted to stabilize the chemical process. That's what they like to do. They play with chemical agents and then stabilize the process, and that's exactly what a tailings pond is. So when we brought in one alternative resources, chemists instead of chemical engineers, they stayed longer and enjoyed the job more. That's how we as HR made a difference in transferability of skills. Just a practical experience. Oh wait, sorry.
Any other questions? Yep.
Which one do you think comes first, the competency framework or the job description?
Which comes first?
So is it like the job description is set and then they use the competencies into it? Or is it the competencies set first and then from that we tailor and write a job description?
When I do organizational design, so again, we'll start up here and then work our way down. I start with, why are we here? What is the objective? What is the goal? And then break down to departments, divisions, whatever, however we're going to organize the work. And then from those smaller pieces of what the objective is, from that we just start deciding on specific competencies. And then we work on job descriptions when we staff. Yes, sorry.
So we as an organization did exactly that. I worked for CPA, Chartered Professional Accountants, we merged. So a lot of people's jobs changed during that merger. We sat down as an organization, identified what our key competencies were. We all sat down in our own individual roles, and we determined what technical competencies we have, what our work processes are, how that fits into the regulatory environment, as well what professional development we need to excel in our role. Every single person from the CEO all the way down to like reception in our organization did this, and it was a very useful exercise. So for future hiring, they now have a tailored job description that's actually been written by the person doing the job.
Thanks. You got a question?
We did exactly the same thing as you were talking about last year, and it was really powerful exercise. It also really, when we started talking to employees and hashing out those job descriptions, like it's not a one-line item that looks like a job posting, but really getting into how do you get to that line item. It was amazing how many employees were undertrained and underdeveloped because they didn't know how to get to that one key core competency. So we were able to provide training and development. We had a happier workplace. The employees enjoy their jobs, and they feel valued. So.
Yeah, our experience has been that when you focus on competencies and building those competencies in your workforce, you can't help but have a more engaged workforce. And you also, if you can identify career pathing based on competencies and growth, it makes your organization strong. And there's now no such thing as a dead-end job. It's so much of employee engagement, which, based on the latest stats coming out of organizations that measure this sort of thing, something like 65% of employees in North America really don't care about the work they do or the places that they do it or the people that they do it for. And what they found is if you focus on competency and growth of competency in individuals and give them the tools and the ability to grow themselves and grow into not only their own job but into other jobs and to move around the organization and grow internally, you generate an engaged workforce. An engaged workforce is 3 to 5 times more productive than one that's just showing up for a paycheck. Everybody, I say this only partially as a joke, but we should all work like dogs. And people, I say that, and people look at it and go, well, that's nuts. You know, who wants to work like a dog? Has anybody actually seen a dog work?
Yes.
That's why I wanted to die.
Yeah, sleeps well.
Okay? I have a retriever. Okay? And when that dog is happiest is when it gets to do its job. And its reward is it gets to do it again. Right? Wouldn't it be great if we could all go to work every day and work like a dog? Be absolutely thrilled, use all of the talent that we have, and then get to do it again. And get to do it again. Wouldn't that be a great place to work? We should all work like dogs. That should be everybody's goal. Organizations should be designed to help people work like dogs. That's my goal. Anybody else? We've flummoxed you?
Our agency is really going to be focusing a lot on hiring for values and alignment with the agency values and the agency principles, and really considering competencies in terms of education and things like that as teachable skills. How would you say that you can find a balance between establishing and defining the critical competencies of a role while balancing that agency alignment piece?
Everybody here familiar with Good to Great? The book? Everybody? Who isn't familiar with Good to Great? Okay. If you read one management book this year, read that one. Okay. Good to Great, Collins. Jim Collins wrote it, and it's an analysis of successful organizations. And they came to the conclusion, based on empirical evidence across hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of successful organizations, the critical thing is getting the right, they refer to, who you let on the bus. Right? And if you put the right people on the bus, they'll figure out how to get things done. So the alignment with the organization and cultural fit with the organization, turns out it's actually one of the most critical things in determining whether your organization will be successful. WestJet hires for attitude and trains for skill. Task-based skill is the easiest thing to train. Now, if you can find someone who has both, right, then obviously they're a higher level candidate. But the idea is to identify minimum technical competence necessary to do the work, and then hire for fit. Okay? Does that make sense? And priority, if I have a choice between someone with the technical skills or someone who's a cultural fit and has the right attitudes, aptitudes, behavioral attitudes that I need, that's the person I'll hire. Because I can always teach them. If they're the right kind of person, I can teach them what they need to know. Does that make sense? Right? So and again, maybe I'm biased, but my bias is towards the behavioral side versus the technical side. And I don't trust degrees and diplomas.
Thank you. Jake?